Imagine being invited to a blind date not because someone thought you deserved love, but because they wanted to laugh at you, only for the night to take the most shocking turn when the city's most powerful single-dad CEO walked in and turned the entire joke into a life-changing proposal. Stay with me till the end of this story, because you won't believe how hearts can change in the most unexpected places. And before we begin, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful stories like this one. Her name was Emily, a quiet, gentle woman who had learned the hard way what loneliness felt like. Her past was filled with silent nights and whispered prayers that one day someone would see her heart instead of mocking her scars. She wasn't the kind of woman who walked into a room and demanded attention, no. Her presence was softer, her beauty hidden beneath plain dresses and a shy smile that rarely reached her eyes, but it was enough for her so-called friends to make her the butt of a cruel joke. They whispered among themselves, giggling as they set her up on a blind date, not with the intention of helping her find love, but to entertain themselves by watching her be awkward, by recording her reaction when she realized she was alone in a fancy restaurant, waiting for someone who would never come. Emily almost didn't go, sensing something was wrong, but she reminded herself that hope, no matter how fragile, was worth the risk, so she put on her soft lavender dress, brushed her wavy brown hair, and walked into that glittering hotel restaurant with a trembling heart. She didn't know that at the same moment, Alexander Reed, the most talked-about CEO in the city, was walking into the same room, carrying the weight of a broken heart and the responsibility of raising his 6-year-old daughter alone. Alexander was not the kind of man you missed, tall, commanding, sharp-jawed with eyes that burned like storm clouds before rain. He was the name whispered in boardrooms and splashed across magazines. He didn't believe in blind dates, he didn't believe in romance anymore, not after his wife passed away leaving him to fight battles both at work and at home, but tonight he had been convinced by a close business partner that meeting someone different might soften his guarded heart. So when Emily sat at her table, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, unaware of the hidden laughter of those who set her up, and when Alexander walked in, scanning the room with his piercing gaze, fate drew a line between two broken souls. Emily expected to be stood up, expected to hear the faint snickers from behind the tall glass walls where her so-called friends were watching, but instead she looked up and froze when a man far too powerful to be real stopped in front of her table and asked in a low, steady voice, "Emily?" Her heart leapt into her throat as she nodded, uncertain why someone like him would even know her name, but Alexander, though equally surprised, sat down across from her, sensing something unusual in the way her eyes held both fear and hope. The first few moments were awkward. Emily spoke quietly, stumbling over her words, while Alexander observed, measuring not her clothes or her looks, but the truth in her hesitant smile. As the evening wore on, their conversation slowly unfolded like an unexpected melody. She spoke about books, about painting late at night when the world was asleep, about the little joys she held onto in a life that often felt cruel, and he, for the first time in years, found himself listening, truly listening, to a woman who wasn't trying to impress him with titles or wealth. But behind them, those who had orchestrated the cruel joke were restless. They exchanged glances, whispering with irritation that the night wasn't going the way they planned. Emily, however, noticed the shadows of their laughter in the reflection of the restaurant's polished walls and her stomach twisted with shame. She wanted to stand, to flee before the humiliation became unbearable, but Alexander noticed her trembling fingers and leaned in closer, his voice gentle but commanding as he said, "Ignore them. They don't matter. Tonight, it's just you and me." She looked into his eyes, unsure why someone like him would defend her, but in that moment something inside her cracked open. A fragile hope that maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. The dinner stretched into hours, and while Emily thought it was simply kindness that made Alexander stay, the truth was far more. He hadn't felt this alive in years, hadn't felt drawn to someone's soul instead of their surface, and he realized with startling clarity that he didn't want the night to end. When dessert arrived, and laughter from the corner grew louder as if mocking Emily's every move, Alexander suddenly pushed back his chair and stood, drawing every gaze in the restaurant. Emily froze, terrified that this was the moment the joke would be revealed, but then the unthinkable happened. Alexander turned to her, eyes blazing with an intensity that silenced the entire room, and without hesitation, he said, "Emily, will you marry me?" Gasps erupted, her so-called friends choked on their drinks, people turned in their seats, phones dropped from stunned hands. Emily's breath hitched, her heart pounding so wildly she thought she might faint. She stared at him, unable to believe what she had just heard, and in the silence that followed, one truth became undeniable: the joke wasn't on her anymore, it was on everyone else. Emily's world tilted on its axis as the weight of Alexander's words hung in the air, a proposal so sudden, so unbelievable, that it felt like a dream painted in the wrong colors, yet the sincerity in his storm-gray eyes left no room for doubt. The restaurant that moments ago buzzed with cruel whispers now sat frozen in stunned silence, every pair of eyes fixed on the quiet woman who was supposed to be humiliated, and the powerful man who instead placed her on a pedestal. She couldn't speak, her lips parted in shock, her breath shallow, because her entire life she had been overlooked, pushed aside, treated as less, and now here stood a man who could have anyone in the world, asking her for a place in his life. Her so-called friends, red-faced with embarrassment, tried to laugh it off, whispering excuses that it was all a misunderstanding, but Alexander silenced them with a single glance so sharp it cut through their shallow amusement. He turned back to Emily, lowering himself slightly so only she could hear, and said, "I know this is sudden. I don't expect an answer now. But I need you to understand, I see you. I've been where you are. And I can't let them win." His words shook her more than the proposal itself, because they weren't about spectacle, they weren't about proving a point, they were about truth, and Emily, for the first time in her life, felt chosen. That night, she didn't give him her answer, she simply nodded, tears shining in her eyes, and Alexander escorted her out of the restaurant with a protectiveness that sent whispers trailing behind them. News of the proposal spread like wildfire by morning. Headlines splashed across tabloids, social media ablaze with speculation about who Emily was, the ordinary woman who had captured the attention of the city's most untouchable CEO. People sneered, some mocked, others romanticized the story, but Emily kept her world small, returning to her quiet routines while her heart struggled to process what had happened. Days later, Alexander showed up at her doorstep, his little daughter clutching his hand shyly, her golden curls bouncing as she peeked up at Emily with wide, curious eyes. "This is Lily," Alexander said softly, and Emily knelt down, her trembling hands meeting the tiny girl's as warmth spread through her chest. It was Lily who broke the tension, wrapping her arms around Emily's neck without hesitation, as though some instinct knew her father had chosen well. Over the weeks that followed, Alexander didn't pressure Emily, he showed up not as a CEO, but as a father and a man willing to learn who she was. He watched her paint, listened to her read softly in the park, laughed when Lily tugged Emily into games of hide-and-seek, and slowly Emily began to understand that his proposal hadn't been a moment of impulse, it had been the beginning of something he was ready to fight for. Still, Emily battled her fears, she wondered if she was enough, if the world would always see her as a joke, if Alexander's world of glittering wealth and ruthless business could ever make space for her fragile, quiet heart. But one evening, as the three of them sat on a blanket beneath the stars, Lily fast asleep between them, Alexander took Emily's hand and said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. That's all I want. That's all she needs." His voice broke on the last words, and Emily understood the depth of his loneliness, the ache of a man who had lost and yet still dared to love again. It was then she realized her answer wasn't about whether she could fit into his world, but whether she could open her heart to the possibility of happiness, and the answer was yes. Their wedding, months later, wasn't the grand spectacle tabloids expected, it was small, intimate, filled with laughter and the scent of flowers, and when Alexander looked at Emily as though she was his entire world, the people who once mocked her faded into irrelevance. Emily walked down the aisle not as the shy woman afraid of whispers, but as a woman who had been chosen, not by accident, not as a joke, but because her heart had been seen by the only man whose gaze truly mattered. And when Alexander kissed her under the canopy of white blossoms, the past melted away, leaving only a future where love, once mocked, stood victorious. And that, dear viewer, is why you should never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes the most unexpected souls carry the strongest love stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales that remind us all that love is real, even in the most surprising places.